we have used isolation as a torture, right? We know that solitary confinement used in prisons is a form of severe torture, even though you are not touching a person, just putting them in a small cell just by themselves really plays dirty tricks on their mind, right? It causes them to have a self psychological and physical harm. There are even cases reported of death. So they did a study where they intentionally blocked oxytocin being uptaken in nucleus accumbens and basal forebrain, which are the reward centers in our body. So I'm going to re-record this. So they did a research study where they blocked oxytocin in nucleus accumbens, basal forebrain, and other reward centers in the brains of a mice by blocking their oxytocin receptor, and their social activity went down. Their interactions went down because they didn't get as much out of that interaction. You may have seen in the wild, like the animals touch each other quite a bit. Like you may have seen those turtles piled up on each other. There is a natural benefit of touching and hugging and being in the company of others. It's a complex mechanism of action. I don't think we have a chance. This is not the right platform for me to go in detail, but when I teach neuroscience students, I actually go in much more detail about what kind of brain regions are involved in making social connections, like what is a mirror neuron system and things like that. Now, how can you activate the release of oxytocin? You can activate release of oxytocin by hugging, massaging, cuddling, making love, holding hands, or patting your pet or something like that. You may have seen couples holding hands, right? Like it's not only just public show of affection. It does make people feel closer to each other. It gives you a tactile stimulation, etc. And there is an evolutionary advantage of it, right? Because evolution, the humans like Homo sapiens sapiens survive better than other primates or other species because we developed this sense of society, right? As you may know, Neanderthals had a capacity to be in touch with around 130 people versus Homo sapiens had capacity to be in touch with around 150 people. Just that difference of 30 more people increased our capacity to stay in touch with groups of other members of our species and probably may have contributed to our survival over Neanderthals and other primate species. So unfortunately, in this day and age, we are losing those connections. The more socially involved a human being is, they have a higher chance of surviving and thriving. So I say in our quest of being independent, we have become lonely. Like the more money somebody makes, or the higher in the prestige stage goes, or more resources we have, we want to be as independent as possible. But one of the downside of being extremely independent that you don't get help from anybody, and once you don't get help from anybody, they don't ask you for help. So everybody becomes in their own silos independent. And when you actually need somebody, you have such an hesitation to ask for help because in our society, asking for help is considered a sign of weakness rather than a sign of strength. Let me repeat this again. In our quest to be independent, we have become lonely. We all want to be as independent as possible. We don't want to ask for anybody's help. Well, the other person is also trying to be as independent as possible. So they don't ask your help. So in a society, we are becoming so independent but simultaneously we are becoming so lonely. Back in the days when we had less resources, less money, less security, we depended on each other for childcare, parents' care, like elderly parents' care, and just to survive. We had a lot better social connections. But in this day and age of highly advanced modern technology, we are having less and less connections. Now, I would like to talk about the perils of chronic loneliness. So, studies have shown that chronically lonely people, they are in a prolonged state of fight or flight, right? It activates your sympathetic nervous system. So your ability to show empathy goes down, and your ability to accurately read other people's intentions goes down, because like as exercise, when you exercise your muscles. The more you exercise, the stronger your muscles get. Guess what? Social interaction is also a type of social muscle. So we have this system in our brain called mirror neuron system, which is responsible to interpret other people's intentions. So like if I go to a party and I just, without saying, if I just extend my hand out like that, the other person comes and gives me a handshake. I didn't ask them to shake my hands, but they shook my hand because they read my intention. The way they read my intention is they replay my action in their head through their mirror neuron system to see what is usually my intention when I carry out that activity. So that must be the other person's intention when they are carrying out that activity. So I reciprocate by just reading other people's intentions. So this reading capacity is a type of social muscle. More we exercise that social muscle, we get better at reading other people's non-verbal communications and intentions. So people who are chronically lonely, they tend to misread other people's social signals. When you misread other people's social signals, you run into more divorces, run in with neighbors, run in with having estrangement of friends and family members, right? Because you are misreading them. Person becomes a lot more reactive, defensive, uh, and this creates a self-fulfilling prophecy that uh, I don't get along with this person, so they read your defensiveness, and they eventually start getting away from you. So it's like a self-fulfilling thing, and the stress that happens from loneliness actually increases amount of inflammation in your body that suppresses your immune system, that increases your risk of having cardiovascular events, even cancer, diabetes, dementia, and stuff like that. So that is the biological basis how loneliness can kill you, but there are also some social and psychological basis, because chronically lonely people usually have a lower self-esteem. They may have a lower motivation for self-care, right? If you're not going out with your friends or family, do I really need to change my clothes, right? I'm not going to go out today. I can stay in my pajamas all day long, right? They may have habitual self-neglect. They may have abandonment of positive behavior, right? Like if you are just going to cook for yourself, you may not cook that much and just eat that peanut butter cracker, right? Versus many elderly women do that. Like they usually cook really well when their husbands were around. But as soon as the husband of this spouse dies, they stop cooking as much because they say, "Ah, I'm not going to cook for one person, or I'm not going to cook because my children have left the house." So loneliness creates unhealthy behaviors from a societal perspective. If you are chronically lonely and you don't go out, then do I really need to keep my sleep schedule, right? I can stay up all night long and watch TV because who cares if I sleep all day long, right? But if you have an agenda that every morning you're going for a walk with your neighbor, then you're likely to go to bed at the right time so you can maintain that schedule. So these are very subtle changes, but they're very important changes. We have used isolation as a torture, right? We know that solitary confinement used in prisons is a form of severe torture, even though you are not touching a person, just putting them in a small cell just by themselves really plays dirty tricks on their mind, right? It causes them to have a self psychological and physical harm. There are even cases reported of death. And we are going through this loneliness epidemic, right? When the COVID happened, unfortunately, the whole society decreased their social connections, and that has not gotten any better for some people. Did you know that good habits spreads through your connections? So you are influenced by the social norms. So, for example, everybody in your group has overweight or obesity. You don't feel as bad to have a certain weight. So, a person's group, whatever they do, it usually carries over to what they do. You know, we like to go with grain. Like if you're in a group which goes to hiking all the time, you're much more likely to go on a hike. But if you're in a group that gets together to have a drink in happy hours, then you're much more likely to do that. So to form good habits, it's very important to be in the right network of people because humans usually go with grain. Our need to be accepted in our tribe usually outweighs our individual wishes. So just to be stay in the tribe, we do things that we may not even agree with, but we want to be included. So we do things what our group, our mob around us do. So it's very important to be in the right group. So there was a study by Dr. James Fowler that when a one person lost five-point weight, not only it made their spouse lose weight, son lose weight, but son's friend's mom lost weight. And you think, how is that possible? How is that possible that one person's healthy habits will affect the person that is socially connected to them and not even geographically connected to them? So I'll give you my own example. I talk to my high school friend all the time. He lives on West Coast, and he's a crazy runner. And he was not a runner growing up. And he's telling me that he can run for longer period of time in a shorter period of time. So his speed is much more. He can run longer distance in a shorter period of time in his mid 40s than in his early 30s. So just hearing that one time made me feel like, dang, if he can do it, I can do it. Uh, so so life changes, health changes can make a difference not only in yourself, but the people who are socially connected to you, and they may not be even geographically connected to you. You can watch 100 videos about benefit of running, but if your friend tells you that, hey, buddy, that I have been running, do you want to run with me? It makes a huge difference. So our social connections are very important. That's why I recommend you bring a loved one with you in these sessions. That's why I recommend that you bring a loved one with you during these sessions because if they make habit changes, it's much easier for you to do it together. For example, in my situation, I'm gonna eat whatever my wife cooks, right? Like no matter how many ideas I have that what I should eat, but I usually eat what my wife makes. So having both the parties on the same page can make a huge difference. Your loved one can monitor your behavior, right? If you say something and do something else, they know you really well. So your loved one can monitor your behavior. They can inhibit the wrong things and facilitate the right health behaviors, right? Because your loved one wants what's best for you, right? So if you are deviating, they can help you, and they can also create norms, right? Humans are very habit-prone individuals. Like we do uh, same thing over and over again. So if you get into habit of eating healthy every afternoon, you don't have to much think about. You don't have to think about it a whole lot. You just do it automatically. So having the right loved one involved in our sessions is very important. And as you know, happiness also spreads through your social network. So if your friends are really happy, you're much more likely to be a happy person, right? Because we usually reciprocate each other's health behaviors and happiness. But the same token, if your friend circle is continuously sad, then it does spills over in your life. Many seniors tell me that I do this online brain training by swiping or playing games on their phone or screens or something like that. I feel that having a social interaction is much better way to exercise your brain, because when you are interacting with somebody, participating in a discussion requires a good amount of executive function. It requires good amount of language area of the brain to pick the right words, think about the old things that happened, the things you are planning in future, and stuff like that. You have to memorize good amount of data, right? If you're talking to somebody and if they tell you something, you have to kind of remember that. And you kind of have to hold yourself down, right? About not saying something. So taking turns while communicating. So it requires a very good verbal and non-verbal dance when we are communicating with other people in a social situation. So it's a type of really good mental exercise. Uh, so social connections can facilitate our cognitive performance. And that's why many times we feel exhausted after going to a party, right? So have you ever had this experience that you've gone to a party, come home, and feel exhausted? Now, you did not do any kind of physical activity or exercise. Why do you feel exhausted? You feel exhausted because your social brain had to keep up with so many things going on. And the less practice you have doing those things, the less capacity you have, right? For some people, they can go to one party after other party of the other party and they are okay. Versus others, they go to a big gathering for 1 hour and they are done. They need to go home to be by themselves because their social muscle is so weak that they don't have that resilience or capacity to deal with multiple people. Now, you may have seen this in dementia patients as well. Like many of my dementia patients, they do okay if they are talking with one or two people. But if they go to a large group of people, they decompensate really fast. You may have seen this around Thanksgiving and stuff like that. During holiday season, when many family members gather, elderly person with dementia usually decompensate, or they have to isolate themselves. It's because their social muscle has gotten weaker.